Behind bars, some names terrify the inmates and even prison officers.
All right, ladies, check your marks. March time, march!
These are the names of the most feared women in prison. These women have earned themselves notorious reputations for the crimes they've committed, leaving everyone within and without the prison walls on the edge. These are the most feared women in prison. Wana Barazza. Wana wasn't born a criminal, but born to a dysfunctional family that would later mar her. Her mother, Just Samperio, was an alcoholic who reportedly exchanged her for 3 beers to a man who repeatedly forced himself on her while she was in his care. Soon, this man's shenanigans with Barazza got her pregnant with a son. That further affected the order of Barazza's life, but she would end up making a path for herself in the wrestling ring. She became a professional wrestler under the name of La Dama del Silencio, which means the Lady of Silence in English. Who knows why? Maybe because Barazza didn't talk much while fighting her opponents in lucha libre, a form of Mexican masked professional wrestling. By 2005, Mexico had come under fire as several murders were reported in the city. The police were left with questions if there were killers in the city or if it was the work of a serial killer. Soon, they realized the shock of their lives. It was not just a serial killer, but a woman named Wana Barazza. It was really shocking because Barazza was well known during the day as a pro wrestler. But one thing that eluded fans and the police was the fact that Barazza was a pro wrestler during the day, but a pro killer at night. Beginning in 2003, Wana Barazza would gain entrance to the homes of elderly women by pretending to help carry in groceries or claiming to be sent by the government for medical help. Once inside, she would pick a weapon, like a set of stockings or a telephone cord, and strangle them. Barazza seems to have been unusually methodical about choosing her victims. She managed to acquire a list of women who were on a government assistance program. Then, she used this list to identify elderly women who lived alone and used fake credentials to pretend that she was a nurse sent by the government to check their vital signs. By the time she left, her victim's blood pressure was always 0/0. Barazza would then look through her victims' houses for something to take with her, though the crimes don't seem to have been motivated by financial gain. Wana Barazza would only take a small memento from her victims, like a religious trinket. Since the victims were elderly women, the police believed that the killer was a man with a confused sexual identity who had been abused as a child by an elderly relative. Eyewitness descriptions of a possible suspect reinforced this idea. According to the witnesses, the suspect had the stocky build of a man, but wore women's clothing. As a result, the city police began rounding up known transvestite prostitutes for questioning. While a part of this assumption was right, Barazza is not a transvestite. Over the next few years, Barazza killed many more women, perhaps almost 50, before police finally caught a break in the case. This break came in 2006, when Barazza once again gained access to an 82-year-old woman's home and strangled her with a stethoscope. As she was leaving the scene, a woman who was renting a room in the victim's home returned and found the body. She immediately called the police. With the help of the witness, the police were able to arrest Barazza before she left the area. During questioning, Barazza confessed to having strangled at least one woman, stating that she committed the crime out of a sense of anger at elderly women in general. Her hatred was rooted in feelings toward her mother, who gave her away to an older man who abused her as a child. According to Barazza, he didn't act alone, but the evidence at every crime scene suggested she did. She was eventually charged with 16 different murders, but she is believed to have murdered about 49 people. Even with the many people that she has murdered, Barazza was not sorry for what she did. Eventually, she was sentenced to 759 years in prison. I wonder why the judge didn't say life sentence instead. 759 is like forever for real. If you think Barazza is truly a scary human, you should meet Katherine Mary Knight. Another woman raised in an unconventional and dysfunctional family environment. Her mother, Barbara Ruffin, had been married to Jack Ruffin and lived with him in the small town of Aberdeen in New South Wales' Hunter Valley. They had 4 sons before Barbara began an adulterous relationship with Ken Knight, a friend and co-worker of her then-husband. With this new man, Barbara moved to Moree and had an additional 4 children, which included twin girls, of which Katherine Knight was one of them. In 1959, when Katherine was 4 years old, Jack Royan died, and his 2 older sons had to move into Barbara and Ken's home. Ken was a violent alcoholic who would force himself on Barbara up to 10 times per day, a fact that was not hidden from Barbara's daughters. Soon, Barbara's brothers and uncles started to force themselves on her as well, until she was age 11. This made Katherine keep to herself a lot because her mother shunned her whenever she complained about abuse. While she was in high school, Katherine was known as a lover and a bully who stood over smaller children. She assaulted at least one boy at school with a weapon and was once injured by a teacher, who was subsequently found to have acted in self-defense. By contrast, when not in a rage, Katherine was a model student and often earned awards for her good behavior. But after high school, Katherine became a street fighter who stood in defense of her co-worker and friend, David Keller. The two eventually got close and got married in 1974. Barbara feared for this union and advised her son-in-law to be careful of Katherine, who she believed could kill him. It does not seem like Kellett took the advice seriously, and he soon began to see things clearly for himself. On their wedding night, Katherine tried to strangle Kellett Al because he fell asleep only after having intercourse with her 3 times. You must be wondering if Kellett stayed in that marriage after his near-death experience. Well, he did stay in the hell of a marriage. The marriage proved particularly violent, and, on one occasion, a heavily pregnant Katherine burned all of Kellett's clothing and shoes before hitting him across the back of the head with a frying pan, simply because he had arrived home late from a darts competition after reaching the finals. In fear for his life, Kellett fled before collapsing in a neighbor's house and was treated for a severely fractured skull. Police wanted to charge Katherine, but she changed her behavior to ingratiating Kellett and talked him into dropping the charges. Kellett must not really love his life, right? Well, he soon got to a point where he had to leave Katherine after the birth of their first child, Melissa, for another woman, as he could no longer cope with the abuse. Soon, after the separation, Katherine attempted to kill Melissa by placing her on a railway line shortly before a train would pass. Luckily, an old man found and rescued 2-month-old Melissa just a few minutes before the train passed. All of these happened while Katherine was outside threatening to kill people with an axe. She was captured and taken to St. Elmo's Hospital, but apparently, she recovered and signed herself out the following day. A few days later, Katherine slashed the face of a woman with one of her knives and demanded she drive her to Queensland to find Kellett. The woman escaped after they stopped at a service station. However, by the time police arrived, Katherine had taken a young boy hostage and was threatening him with the knife. She was disarmed when police attacked her with brooms and was admitted to the Morrissey Psychiatric Hospital. As soon as Kellett was informed of the incident, he left his girlfriend and moved back in with Katherine and his child to support her. Soon, in March 1980, they had another daughter, Natasha Maury. But Katherine soon left Kellett and started an affair with a man named John Charles Thomas Price. At first, life was a bunch of roses for the two and their 3 children, but things soon took a turn for the worse. In February 2000, a series of assaults on Price culminated with Knight stabbing him in the chest. Finally fed up, he kicked her out of his house. On February 28, he stopped at the Scone Magistrates Court on his way to work and took out a restraining order in an attempt to keep her away from both himself and his children. That afternoon, Price told his co-workers that if he did not come to work the next day, it would be because Knight had murdered him. Despite their pleas that Price should not return home, he stated that he was afraid Katherine would kill his children if he did not. Price arrived home to find that Katherine, although not there herself, had sent the children away for a sleepover at a friend's house. He then spent the evening with his neighbors before returning home and going to bed at 11 p.m. Earlier that day, Katherine had bought new black lingerie and had videotaped all her children while making comments that have since been interpreted as a crude will. She later arrived at Price's house while he was sleeping and sat watching television for a few minutes before having a shower. She then woke Price and they got intimate, after which he fell asleep. The next day at 6 a.m., a neighbor became concerned that Price's car was still in the driveway, and when he did not arrive at work, his employer sent a worker to see what was wrong. Both the neighbor and the worker tried knocking on Price's bedroom window to wake him, but they alerted the police after noticing blood on the front door. Breaking down the back door, police found Price's body, with Katherine comatose from taking a large number of pills. She had stabbed Price with a butcher's knife while he was sleeping. According to the blood evidence, he awoke and tried to turn the light on before attempting to escape, while Katherine chased him through the house. He managed to open the front door and get outside, but he either stumbled back inside or was dragged back into the hallway, where he finally died after bleeding out. Several hours after Price had died, Katherine skinned him and hung the skin from a meat hook on the architrave of a door to the lounge room. She then decapitated Price and cooked parts of his body, serving up the meat with baked potato, carrot, pumpkin, beetroot, zucchini, cabbage, yellow squash, and gravy in 2 settings at the dinner table, along with notes beside each plate, each having the name of one of Price's children on it. Price's head was also found in a pot with vegetables. The pot was still warm, estimated to be at between 40 and 50 degrees Celsius, indicating that the cooking had taken place in the early morning. Katherine claimed that Price had abused their daughter, but the accusations were found to be groundless. After her arrest, her initial offer to plead guilty to manslaughter was rejected, and she was charged with murdering Price, to which she entered a plea of not guilty. On November 8, 2001, Justice O'Keefe pointed out that the nature of the crime and Katherine's lack of remorse required a severe penalty. He sentenced her to life imprisonment, refused to fix a non-parole period, and ordered that her papers be marked "definitely never to be released." That was the first time that this had been imposed on a woman in Australian history. But even with the gruesome things that she did, Katherine still believes that the sentence was too much for her. If anyone knew Katherine's story, they'd definitely be scared of being around her, even other inmates, don't you agree? Another scary woman is Joanna Deni. Did you hear about the Peterborough ditch murders? A series of murders which took place in Cambridgeshire, England in March 2013, all courtesy of Joanna Deni. All 3 victims discovered in ditches outside Peterborough were male and died from stab wounds. In Hereford, 2 other men were stabbed, but luckily they survived the injuries. The 3 victims of Joanna were Kevin Lee, Łukasz Slabajewski, and John Chapman. Kevin Lee was a property developer, landlord, and lover of Joanna, while Łukasz Slabajewski, a Polish national, met Joanna through a shared interest in drink and drugs, and John Chapman was a housemate of Joanna. Slabajewski was killed at some point between March 19 and 29, 2013, while both Lee and Chapman were killed on March 29. After the killings, Joanna was driven by her friend Gary Stretch to Hereford, where she stabbed the 2 other men, chosen separately and at random, both of whom survived. Has Joanna always been a serial killer? Let's take a look at her personal life. She was born in August 1982 in St. Albans, Hertfordshire, and grew up in nearby Harpenden. At the time of the killings, Joanna had given birth to 2 children, but she was never around for them. She specifically targeted men during her killing spree, telling her acquaintance Lloyd that she did not wish to kill a woman, and especially not a woman with children. Lloyd stated Joanna had wanted to kill 9 men in total, seeking to be like Bonnie and Clyde. Joanna stabbed men for the purpose of entertainment, telling Stretch, "I want my fun. I need you to get my fun." She later told a psychiatrist that she had found murder to be moreish, and that after the first killing, she got a taste for it. In November 2013, Joanna pleaded guilty to all 3 murders and 2 further attempted murders. What's shocking is how Joanna's sister, Maria, was not surprised by the guilty plea, as she said, "I think she did that to control the situation. She likes people to know she's the boss." During the trial, Joanna could be seen laughing during proceedings, stating, "I have pleaded guilty, and that's that." At one point during her trial, Joanna stood up and told presiding Mr. Justice Spencer, "I don't want to be controlled by anybody. I don't want to be controlled by my lawyers, by the police, by anybody." Mr. Justice Spencer called Joanna a cruel, calculating, selfish, and manipulative serial killer, and sentenced her to life imprisonment with an additional order that she should never be released due to the premeditation of each murder in 2014. Whilst she was on remand before the trial, Joanna was housed in segregation at HM Prison Bronzefield, a Category A prison in Surrey. Prison staff found an escape plot in her diary which involved killing or seriously injuring a prison officer, cutting off one of the officer's fingers, and using the amputated finger to fool the biometric system in the prison. Because of the plot, Joanna was placed in solitary confinement from September 2013 to September 2015. Even though she claims isolation left her tearful and upset, she won't be let out because she was feared by inmates and even prison officers. Now it's time for today's subscriber pick. What crime do you think this woman committed to have her mugshot captured this way? Rumor has it that she is one of the most feared women in prison, who terrorized other inmates and even prison officers in prison, but no one knows her name or information about her. Do you know anything about this scary woman? Let us know in the comments section. And if you think other women on this list have terrorized people in and out of the prison, then you haven't heard about Renee Akube. She has been seen as uncontrollably aggressive and hostile by social workers and psychiatrists since she was 11 years old. When she was 13, a social worker at the Brandon Mental Health Center in Manitoba wrote a report about her saying she was an angry and violent young girl. Akube set fires, sniffed solvents, stole cars, and beat up young girls. These acts led to her spending most of her teen years in custody. Even her aunt described her as a really screwed-up kid, impulsive, and a risk-taker. Akube was raised by her grandmother after her father murdered her mother. She didn't know about her father's crime until she was 11 years after she realized that her grandmother was not her mother. At age 32, she had become a terror that sent chills down the spine of everyone in prison. At the time, she was responsible for 5 hostage takings, involving guards and inmates, in prisons across Canada, and a 6th alleged hostage taking in Truro, NS. Akube first went to prison in 2000 when she started a 3.5-year sentence for drug trafficking and several other crimes, including assault with a weapon and escaping custody. She has since racked up a long record of prison crimes and is serving an accumulated sentence of 21 years. She was eligible for parole, but her behavior in prison won't let her be released in 2015. But after that year, she tried to behave better, and soon the Parole Board of Canada granted Akube, who has a teenage daughter, 2 months of day parole, stating that she has made considerable progress since she was last reviewed for day parole in 2015. But they won't dare grant her full parole because she is a threat to society. She didn't demonstrate compliance and stability throughout her stay, and she was declared a dangerous offender in 2011, breaking a Redford as the first woman to be declared as such. If you still do not understand why, here is the timeline of Akube's activity in jail. In August 2007, while being escorted to a shower by 3 guards at the Nova Institution, Akube grabbed one of the officers and held a metal screw from a CD player to her throat. According to her parole file, she ordered the 2 other officers to leave and forced the first officer to her knees, handcuffed her, and tied her feet together with bootlaces. She demanded cigarettes and a pop, a call to the president of the Elizabeth Fry Society, and a transfer to another institution. She held the victim for approximately 2 hours before she agreed to free her in exchange for a cigarette. In 2005, while incarcerated in an Ontario women's prison, Akube and another inmate took 2 corrections employees hostage and held them for several hours. The victims were threatened with being killed and were also forced to take medications. One of the victims had her arm and face cut with glass and her arm burned with a cigarette. She was also punched, had air freshener sprayed on her face, and chunks of her hair cut off. In 2004, Akube grabbed another inmate by the neck from behind and threatened to kill her while holding a toothbrush with a razor connected to the top of her neck. In 2003, she and another inmate assaulted a mentally challenged inmate with a metal bar and wooden handle. That victim suffered serious injuries all over her body but luckily managed to escape. In 2002, Akube and an accomplice confined another inmate, tied her up, and beat her with a weapon. Akube also cut the victim's leg with glass and threatened to kill her in a hostage-taking that lasted for 4 hours. In a second incident in 2002, Akube slashed an officer's face with what was believed to have been a razor blade. And in 2001, while incarcerated at an Aboriginal healing lodge, Akube and another inmate took a correctional officer hostage. The other inmate hit the officer in the head with a sock that contained several pieces of metal. When she fell, her radio and keys were taken, while Akube held a knife to the victim's throat and threatened to kill her. Fortunately, the victim was able to escape. With all that Akube has done, do you think she should ever be released back into society? And if she were to remain in jail, what can be done to ensure the safety of other inmates and prison officers? Next is Rebecca Butterfield, one of Australia's most dangerous women who was given additional years after serving her term. Butterfield was convicted of manslaughter after stabbing a fellow prisoner 33 times with a kitchen knife in an unprovoked attack in 2003. She was previously jailed for stabbing a taxi driver over a fare and stabbing a neighbor trying to stop her self-harming. More recently, she attacked a doctor trying to administer a local anesthetic, attacked prison guards with hot tea, and threw hot water at an inmate. Justice Hume noted Butterfield had been abused repeatedly as a child, and her case was sadly illustrative of the lasting trauma and terrible consequences of violent offending. Since the killing in Emu Plains, Butterfield was a danger to other inmates and prison officers, but she had consistently been slicing herself up frustrated all by herself. On 4 occasions, she had cut her own throat so severely she needed hospitalization, and on 1 occasion nearly bled out in her cell. She had also set her cell on fire and banged her head against the cell wall. But in 2009, she seemed intent on doing maximum harm. What the alarmed senior prison officer found when she investigated the thudding sound was Butterfield's skull split wide open. She had headbutted the wall more than 100 times. The prison officer could not help but burst into tears at the gruesome sight. After the end of her sentence in 2016, Butterfield, who was age 41, was still held back in jail as the NSW Supreme Court ruled that she was too dangerous to be released following the end of her sentence for manslaughter. She was housed in Silverwater Women's Prison, and even after she was due for release in late 2020, state authorities then faced the difficult task of where to house her. Without a better place to house her, the NSW Supreme Court Justice Robert Allen Hume extended her continuing detention order until November 2023, saying the 46-year-old had a history of sudden and unprovoked violence. He said, "There is little to indicate that this risk has dissipated to any significant degree in more recent years, or that it is likely to do so for the foreseeable future. Nothing appears to have changed in relation to Butterfield's predilection for sharp objects when available. Her outbursts of violence can be unpredictable in that they are not responsive to anything that is rationally and objectively provocative. They can be constituted by acts that have occurred suddenly with little or no forethought of the consequences. They are indicative of an inability to restrain or regulate her behavior. Without intervention and restraint being immediately available, the consequences can be extremely serious, perhaps even fatal. Where do you think is a better home for Butterfield apart from prison? Brace yourself. This next story is crazy. The story of Roshanara Chowdhury. Chowdhury was born to a Bangladeshi family in Newham, East London, and lived in East Ham. She was the eldest child and attended Plashette School in East Ham, later studying for her A-levels at Newham Sixth Form College. She had been in the final year of a degree in English and Communications at King's College London, but had dropped out shortly before she committed a shocking crime. She told the police that she dropped out because she found the university to be anti-Islamic, since they had given an award to the Israeli politician Shimon Peres, in addition to running counter-radicalization programs. On May 14, 2010, Stephen Timms, the Labour MP for East Ham, was holding his constituency surgery at the Beckton Globe Library in Kingsford Way, East London, when Chowdhury attacked him. She acted as though she were going to shake his hand, and then stabbed him twice in his abdomen with a 6-inch kitchen knife before she was disarmed. She made very full admissions to the police, saying that she had been influenced by dozens of hours of sermons that she had watched of Anwar al-Awlaki, a leader of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. She said her attack was to punish Timms for voting for the Iraq War and as revenge for the Iraqi people. Timms suffered potentially life-threatening wounds, lacerations to the left lobe of his liver, and a perforation to his stomach. A senior police officer said he was extremely fortunate not to have been killed. He underwent emergency surgery at the Royal London Hospital, from which he was discharged on May 19. Chowdhury chose not to attend her trial for attempted murder at the Old Bailey, saying she did not recognize the court's jurisdiction. On November 2, Chowdhury was found guilty of Tims's attempted murder. She was subsequently given a life sentence, with a recommendation that she serve a minimum jail term of 15 years. After the court case, Tims said he was not bitter, but that forgiveness was not possible until his attacker showed remorse. He was seeking the banning of incendiary material on popular internet sites to protect other vulnerable young people from going down the same road. The Revolution Muslim website described Chowdhury as a heroine for stabbing Tims, posted a prayer to destroy the enemies of Islam, naming Tims, and responded to her conviction for attacking Tims by publishing a list of MPs who had voted in favor of the Iraq War, as Tims had, giving advice on how to find details of their constituency surgeries. Presently, Chowdhury is in solitary confinement because she chose to. After she was incarcerated at HM Prison Bronzefield in Ashford, Surrey as a Category A prisoner, she was supposed to be strip-searched before and after being visited. But for religious reasons, she opposes this and instead chooses to remain in solitary confinement. What do you think about these women? Which of them do you find scariest of all? Let us know in the comments section. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.